We have come to liberate you from all the ways that you hold us down. When you hurt me, you hurt you too. When you free me, you free yourself. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Yes? Would you sing that with me? Okay, I'll sing the line, you sing it back to me. We have come to liberate you from all the ways that you hold us down. When you hurt me, you hurt you too. When you free me, you free yourself. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Now you. Everybody rises, that's right. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. You. Poor folk are the first to suffer in this war economy. But I'm your daughter, I'm your mother. We're a chosen family. All together, when you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Woo! When you lift from the bottom, everybody, ooh, sing it again. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises, that's right. When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Hear this. We need air that's clean to breathe. We need water we can drink. You might say that we are weak, but we are stronger than you think. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Oh, when you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Okay. So now when I say we have come to liberate you, it's because liberation is not something they're giving to you. We do not march to the Capitol so that they will give us liberation. That is not how liberation works. When we say we are here to liberate you, we are saying that when they hurt us, when they hold people down, they too are wrapped up in this evil, and we are saying we are here to free you from it. That's the gospel, my friends. That is the gospel. So let's sing that again. And remember that next time you march to the Capitol, y'all, that we are not there asking for something from them, that we are going there to give something to them. Do you understand what I'm saying? So sing with me. to liberate you, sing. From all that ways you hold me down. When you hurt me, you hurt you too. When you free me, you free yourself. You free yourself. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Yeah. You live from the bottom, everybody rises. One more again. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Oh, when you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Oh, when you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody. Now just y'all, sing it out. Everybody. Yeah. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Keep it up, y'all. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. Last 2 times now. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. When you live from the bottom, everybody rises. All right, bring that message to them, y'all. Let's free some people. Peace.
So welcome everybody to the Jubilee Policy Platform Study Group.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nancy Berlin. And I'd also like to welcome you here. And Margaret, do you want to give a shout out since you're our convener?
Sure. This is Margaret Prescott on unceded Chemehuevi land, convener of Policy and Education Working Group. We're very excited to be giving over our regular meeting time for this statewide reading group. We'd like to welcome all of you. Nancy will be filling us in on what we'll be discussing today. I just wanted to say in terms of our format, we're going to do things just slightly differently today because we've got 3 presenters. I'll have to say me being one, I'm excited about that, who will give presentations, and then we will read through the parts of the policy platform that are related to the presentations that will be given, and then go into our small group. So we're a little flexible. We have to change things up in this way, but really delighted to see all of you. And I'll put my name and email in the chat for those of you who would like to find out more about what Policy and Education Working Group, our statewide working group, is involved in. Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Margaret, and excited to have you as a presenter. My name is Nancy Berlin. I'm on the coordinating committee for the California Poor People's Campaign, and I'll also be presenting later. But right now, what I'd like to do is just go over some logistics and housekeeping so we all know how this is going to run today. Some of you are already doing this. Well, first, let me just also give a big thank you and shout out to our tech team and interpreters. Our interpreters are Farah Noah Black and Heather West, our ASL interpreters, and our fabulous tech team, Peg Miller, Reverend Rowan Fairgrove, and Nell Myhand. A lot of you are already putting your names and where you're from in the chat. Please continue to do that. We love to know where you're all from and who's here with us today. Also, you'll see in the chat, we are recording this. We'd like to have it for reference in the future. If you will be recording the large group, but not the small breakout group. So if you would rather not be on video, please turn off your camera. It's also good to stay on mute. That creates a lot fewer distractions unless you're talking to the whole group. You can also put your questions and any comments in the chat. We'll try to answer questions if we have time, and we also love to hear what you're all thinking. So we'll have more time to introduce ourselves when we get into the small groups, and we will talk about that later. And you'll have time to introduce yourself and where you're from. It would be great at that time, if you haven't done this already, to give an acknowledgement of the Indigenous people whose land you're on. And for those of you who don't know whose land you're on, this would be a great time to find out who that is. And there's a link in the chat to help you figure that out as well. So the basic, I just want to go over the basic structure. Margaret went over it briefly. We do have, we're going to go through some basic slides to show you a little bit about more what the Jubilee Policy Platform is. Then we're going to have some presenters to go through what that looks like. Today's presentation is on part 2 of the platform, point 3, which is to redefine welfare as a right that strengthens our society and provides for the general welfare. So all of our presenters will be speaking to that, and we'll be discussing that in our small group. So we'll have some slides, a presentation, we'll go through our demands, and then in the small groups, and then we'll come back after the small groups just to get some more comments and wrap it up. And with that, I think we're ready to start. So I'm going to hand it over to Nell.
Great, thank you so much, Nancy. Welcome, everyone. I'm Nell Myhand. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm on unceded Ohlone land, which is also known as Oakland. And at this point, I would like to ask Reverend Rowan Fairgrove, who is doing our tech support, to share her screen, and we'll start the presentation. So this is the first slide, and it just says where we are. And the image on this slide is a logo of the Poor People's Campaign with a black silhouette on white background. The background is a massive group of people with arms and flags raised with the word California across the top in black letters. Poor People's Campaign across the silhouette in white letters, and a national call for moral revival in black letters on a white background. So the Jubilee Policy Platform is designed to challenge the 5 interlocking injustices. That's the focus of the campaign, and that's the focus of this platform. Systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism and the war economy, and the distorted moral narrative of religious nationalism. And next we have a short video that introduces the 5 principles of the platform and features Jubilee art by David Solnick, which is also featured in my background.
From Alaska to Arkansas, the Carolinas to California, Mississippi to Maine, Kansas to Kentucky, the Bronx to the border, Appalachian hollers to Apache sacred lands, people are coming together to organize their moral outrage against systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and the false narrative of religious nationalism into a powerful moral fusion movement.
There are 140 million people who are poor and struggling against these injustices in the richest country in the world. A society sick with these injustices needs a voice rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values to remind us of who we are and who we must be.
A moral policy agenda to heal the nation. The Poor People's Jubilee platform proclaims that moral policy is economically sound policy. That the 140 million are not only the hope of the poor. that the least of these, who are in actuality most of us, can lead the nation out of the pain that it's been feeling.
The rejected are leading a moral and economic revival to save the heart and soul of this nation. Our platform is grounded in 5 principles.
We need a moral revolution of values to repair the breach in our society. This platform abides by our deepest constitutional and moral commitments to justice. Where harm has been done, it must be acknowledged and undone.
Everybody in, nobody out. Too many people are hurting, and we can't be silent anymore.
When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Instead of trickle down, we start with bottom up.
Prioritize the leadership of the poor, low income, and most impacted. Those who are on the front lines of these crises must also be in the lead in identifying their solutions.
Debts that cannot be paid must be relieved. We demand freedom from servicing debts that cannot be paid.
The Poor People's Jubilee platform now identifies policy and legislative priorities to heal our nation.
We've been investing in punishing the poor, but we must now invest in the welfare of all. We've been investing in systemic racism and voter suppression, but we must now invest in expanding democracy.
We have been investing in killing people. We now must invest in life.
We have been investing in the wealthy and corporations. We must now invest in the people who have built up this country and make it run every day. The 140 million and more who have been abandoned in an era of abundance.
Somebody's been hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
We won't be silent
We will not be silent anymore.
Okay, and so the Jubilee Policy Platform has 5 parts and abides by our deepest constitutional and moral commitments to justice. The image on this slide is a white placard with a bright yellow sun as background, a ribbon across the top that reads, "We declare," and a bullhorn with the word Jubilee blaring out of it.
From Alaska to Arkansas, the Carolinas to California, Mississippi to Maine, Kansas to Kentucky, the Bronx to the border, Appalachian hollers to Apache sacred lands, people are coming together to organize their moral outrage against systemic racism, poverty, ecological devastation, militarism, and the war economy, and the false narrative of religious nationalism into a powerful moral fusion movement.
There are 140 million people who are poor and struggling against these injustices in the richest country in the world. A society sick with these injustices needs a voice rooted in our deepest moral and constitutional values to remind us of who we are and who we must be.
A moral policy agenda to heal the nation. The Poor People's Jubilee platform proclaims that moral policy is economically sound policy. That the 140 million are not only the hope of the poor, that the least of these, who are in actuality most of us, can lead the nation out of the pain that it's been feeling.
The rejected are leading a moral and economic revival to save the heart and soul of this nation. Our platform is grounded in 5 principles.
We need a moral revolution of values to repair the breach in our society. This platform abides by our deepest constitutional and moral commitments to justice. Where harm has been done, it must be acknowledged and undone.
Everybody in, nobody out. Too many people are hurting, and we can't be silent anymore.
When you lift from the bottom, everybody rises. Instead of trickle down, we start with bottom up.
Prioritize the leadership of the poor, low income, and most impacted. Those who are on the front lines of these crises must also be in the lead in identifying their solutions.
Debts that cannot be paid must be relieved. We demand freedom from servicing debts that cannot be paid.
The Poor People's Jubilee platform now identifies policy and legislative priorities to heal our nation.
We've been investing in punishing the poor, but we must now invest in the welfare of all. We've been investing in systemic racism and voter suppression, but we must now invest in expanding democracy.
We have been investing in killing people. We now must invest in life.
We have been investing in the wealthy and corporations. We must now invest in the people who have built up this country and make it run every day. The 140 million and more who have been abandoned in an era of abundance.
Somebody's been hurting our people, and it's gone on far too long, and we won't be silent anymore.
We won't be silent anymore.
Not be silent anymore.
The 5 parts are here on the slide. And what I want to say is that we have worked our way through part 1. We're in part 2 now. Promote the general welfare, the right to welfare, and an adequate standard of living. And we're at point 3 in part 2. Redefine welfare as a right that strengthens our society and provides for the general welfare. And so we have 3 presenters who are going to illuminate these points on the platform and help us understand the problem, essentially. And so we'll be starting with Todd Cunningham, food and wellness organizer with the LA Community Action Network, also known as LA CAN. The image on this slide is a man with glasses wearing an orange t-shirt with the word power and the definition. And then behind him is an orange sunburst with LA CAN in the center. The second presenter will be Margaret Prescott, who is known to many people on the call. She's a co-coordinator of Global Women's Strike US and coordinator of the Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike, and she's a board member of the National Welfare Rights Union. Global Women's Strike, Women of Color in the Global Women's Strike, and the National Welfare Rights Union are all national partners of the Poor People's Campaign. And our third presenter is Nancy Berlin, also known to many people on this call. She's co-founder of Alexandria House, a transitional housing program in LA, and serves on the, as part of the Poor People's Campaign. And so the image description on this slide is that on the left, there's a photo of a white woman holding a book presenting, and on the right is the green Alexandria House logo. And with that, I want to invite Todd Cunningham to bring his thoughts and information to us.
Cool. Thank you so much. You guys can hear me, right?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, cool. So I'll just share my screen. Can you see it?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. So thank you so much for inviting me today. I feel like I'm in with kindred spirits. There's no question about it. It's like I love that video. Uh, I am somewhat familiar with the Poor People's Campaign. We hosted an event here at LA Can a couple of years ago. But this Jubilee policy platform, I'm very excited about. I loved all the things that were in the video about moral revolution, everybody in, nobody out, live from the bottom. You're going to hear many of these kind of themes in my presentation today because we believe in the same kind of things. Here at LA Can, our mission really is to help people dealing with displacement and poverty to create and discover opportunities while serving as a vehicle to ensure that they have a voice, power, and opinions in the decisions that directly affect us. This is another way of saying this is making sure that we recognize the people who are most impacted as being the ones who are have the best ideas, who are best able to solve their issues and problems. All right, no?
Yes, that was applause.
Oh, okay. Okay, cool. Just continuing on, the group that I am a part of I'm blessed to be part of is the Skid Row Food and Wellness Collaborative, who meets here at LA Can on Tongva land. I'm pleased to say that. Our mission statement really is about being in collaboration with our community to strengthen our collective knowledge, recognize that not everyone has the same relationship with food and wellness as others. Some of us eat food out of obligation, some out of guilt, some out of all kinds of reasons. So it's like we want to recognize the way that people come to food, and we feel like that demonstrating that a shared desire for food justice will help to build power and enable our community to thrive. Just a quick context setting for like what happens. Again, we're based in Skid Row, which of course is like well known as a food desert. The access on the left-hand side of the screen, we see that the access to food is typically rather plentiful. Actually, even in Skid Row, there's lots of food everywhere here. But however, all food is not good food. The sources of food comes from places like the missions and emergency food programs, and people are like, a lot of people who come here often are like fleeing domestic violence. So there are emergency food programs for them where they get 3 meals a day, they get 90 days of shelter. Food banks also, there are food banks where people drive up to that many of us may be familiar with. And then of course there are food banks that come to the buildings where people actually are housed in Skid Row. And they have weekly distributions there. And there are donations, of course, from families bringing their minivans and opening up their mom and pop kind of meals that they provide for people. Churches, clubs, and organizations, increasingly more and more clubs from universities and high schools come down. And then fast food restaurants bring their food down. They usually are bringing something that's not necessarily always healthy. And that's the point of this, is the fact that the food is not always healthy. And some of the responses from our community, they talk about the fact that some of the food is often past the expiration date. It looks like they didn't care about what we would eat. They often say it's never healthy. It's always the same food. So the resulting action from that is that people are just not interested in the food. They would just as soon skip a meal than to actually go and like eat this. And that's not good, because we of course know what happens when we're skipping meals. This also, same thing applies to water. There are very, very few water sources inside the 50-block radius of Skid Row. On the right-hand side of the screen, you can see that basically we're talking about the access to fresh, nutritious food is actually scarce. So if the access to regular food is actually plentiful, the access to healthy, fresh, nutritious food is actually scarce, especially in Skid Row. So despite the lack of resources, meaning the amount of money that they get or the amount of sources they can find for good food, the desire for good food is actually very strong. The sources for that there are much fewer of those than there are of places to get just any food. Mutual aid events, like we host 2 of those, one on Sunday and one on Wednesday. Sunday Strong Wellness Wednesday. The Dodgers actually host something also, and I know across the state there are other mutual aid events like this that happen. This may mirror some of your counties where you live. Home cooked prepared meals, of course, is a big source. People love that, of course. Just that love and care comes through when you actually are able to open up a container with food that someone has given love to put it together. We also have created a new food event. We just discovered that like people who are houseless or who are living in extreme poverty often don't get access to new foods new tastes. They aren't queried about what their food memories are and what things like that. I mean, just think about how much food plays a role in all of our lives. It's like for people who are poor, they deserve just as much to be heard, and they want to be heard and want to engage in conversation. Of course, we know that food is a great social lubricant. And so we created an event called Everybody Eats, where we actually bring new foods and new tastes, new chefs to a park and serves this food. And it's just wonderful because it brings out many things that you just wouldn't have actually heard about before. And I think it dispels a lot of the myths that people tend to believe about people who are houseless and people who are living in extreme poverty. Some of the responses people talk about, I've been dying to try these. Then of course, many people think that poor people don't want to eat healthy. We'll just take whatever they give us. So the resulting action with this, of course, we've been pleased to see is people are less likely to skip any meals. They frequently seek this out. They tell other people about these events, and it's just kind of an area that's kind of hidden in plain sight. It's something that just makes complete sense that we should be doing, but over the years, these types of encounters have gone away. The primary source of food assistance is actually a federal program called SNAP, which that SNAP stands for Supplemental Nutritious Access Program. And this program is anything but supplemental. It is actually required for people. It is many times the only income they have. So it's also known in California, as many of us know, as CalFresh. It's also it previously was referred to as food stamps, but on the street, most people refer to it as EBT, because you see in many outlets where it's actually accepted, you'll see a sign that have signs that say EBT accepted here, or just large EBT letters. On the screen here, I've just put the logo for CalFresh Food and the actual card. It comes as a debit card kind of thing that every month people get money deposited into it from the state, from the federal government in the state. Actually, the county is where it actually happens from. But California, despite having such an abundance of food, you'd think that would actually keep people from having to be on this program. But California ranks at or near the bottom in terms of participation with other states, especially with seniors. And I'm going to talk about some of the reasons for why that we rank so low. So let's just move into that. Up until just a few weeks ago, the food stamp allotment was the maximum you could get was $194 a month. That works out to about $2.03 per meal per day. That's ludicrous. And who can eat on $2.03? It's like there's just not really anywhere that can happen. And of course, because people lack cooking facilities, storage, grocery store access, people who live here are not able to stretch that food stamp budget very far. Of course, it's like if you think about it, they in fact are shopping for every meal. So they do not get value pricing. They don't get to take advantage of shopping on specific days versus other ones where there may be savings. It's like every meal that they're actually shopping for results in them having to pay premium prices. And so that money goes even less far. By about the 13th day of the month, they're out of money. That's what tends to happen. So we also look at food security, just to talk about that for a second. So the way that this is measured is around 6 questions. And those questions are about, I'll just read them. In the past month, did you, 1, worry that you would not have enough food? 2, have to eat a limited variety of foods due to lack of resources? 3, have to eat foods that you really did not want to eat because of a lack of resources? 4, have to eat a smaller meal than you felt you needed because there was not enough food? 5, skip a meal because of lack of resources? Or 6, go a whole day and night without eating anything because there was not enough food. A food secure individual, the score on this would basically be 2 or less. But in fact, we found that people who live in Skid Row, when we did this fielded the survey, it actually, the average score was 10.5. So it's 5 times more likely to be food insecure than people who are secure. So it's manifested itself out in terms of food insecurity in many different ways. This is an academic way of doing it, in as much as the way the government will measure food insecurity. But it also, you can see from an economic perspective, the amount of money that people have in their pocket to be able to get food is very nil. On top of that, then I mentioned earlier that like we are among the lowest in participation. So people who don't participate don't get any money. So they're left floating out there trying to find meals every day. COVID-19, of course, underscored the negative impacts on our community after years of disenfranchisement. So, you know, when people are faced with those kind of challenges and barriers to accessing healthy food, we know this. It often results in chronic disease. It's like the average lifespan of someone who is houseless or who has been in a disenfranchised community can be as much as 30 years shorter than people who are not. CalFresh did respond. The government, actually the federal government, responded with the SNAP program by applying what's called the Thrifty Food Plan, which is a new program that was based on, quote unquote, the reality of what people's prices would be, rather than in the past. The program was, when it started back in the 70s, was actually started with an assumption of getting the best price from a warehouse. So getting kind of like outlet prices for food. And of course, now we know that food is more expensive than ever. And when you buy food in a grocery store, it's hardly outlet prices. So today, the program is actually, the way that they measure, the way they created the assistance program was to actually go with real prices. It's already out of date, by the way. It increases, the increase that came in on October 1st was a benefit increase of $12 to $16 per person per month. So if you divide that out, that's not much money. So $12 to $16 per month extra that you're going to get for food that you have to spread across 30 days. Not much at all. But there was lots of pomp and circumstance in the press about this landmark increase in food assistance. But it happened to be on the same day that all the pandemic assistance that had been given before went away. So it was like a net of like about 60 cents an increase of about 60 cents per meal per day that people are now getting if you were getting CalFresh. Not good. So our current situation is, so that's the backdrop. Where we are right now, we are fighting against the county. Our Hunger Action, along with one of our other coalition partners, Hunger Action LA, and an individual plaintiff petitioner, we filed a lawsuit in LA Superior Court against Los Angeles County, demanding that the county comply with the legal requirement to process emergency CalFresh applications in 3 days. So what that means is when someone has less than $150 in a bank account and less than $100 cash on their person, or they can't afford to cover their housing expenses for that month, something called emergency CalFresh is actually kicks in. And it's supposed to kick in, and it's supposed to actually provide, there's a guarantee that provides the person with access to CalFresh within 3 calendar days. LA County at one time did promise 1 day and was able to deliver 1 day, but those days are long gone. Of course, when people are hungry, they're hungry for food now. Los Angeles County failed to provide timely emergency CalFresh to an average of 36% of households eligible for it during the 12-month period from October 2020 through September 2021. And I'll show you some other figures in just a second, but this is at the heart of where we believe there's moral revolution needing to be done. We found that like the offices were, what happened, the background behind this is the offices closed, many of the offices closed throughout the pandemic. Some of them have begun to reopen, but they closed and made them call centers. And so, but the process continued with like, if you had to recertify, or even if you were applying for CalFresh, if you go to a website that was really clunky and not easy to manage, and you had to have high-speed internet, you need to have the top of the line high-speed internet to be able to make it work, because it was so flash heavy and required so many different screens to actually be working at the same time in order to actually apply, which for many people who are eligible for these kind of benefits do not have the access to high-speed internet. But the horror stories continue with like people going, we have stories of people going to the offices and having to slip their paperwork through the security bars to the caseworker, or more often than not, caseworkers not showing up for their appointments. So they would have someone, many stories of people who were disabled who would show up at the CalFresh office to actually provide their paperwork or to get access. Some of the people who are houseless use the DPSS offices as a mail center. So they will allow their mail to come there. They would go there to get their mail to find out the status of their application, and the caseworker would not be there. And you have to, like, I know from my own experience before, is if you have to make a big deal to find out if your caseworker even is there for the day, because they don't tell you that at the beginning. You have to like go through a lot to actually find out. And then of course, what a disappointment is when you find out that they didn't even show up that day. We had to zero in our lawsuit around one specific thing. And so we're focused on this emergency CalFresh the response to the emergency CalFresh need. The supporting data and all this, as I mentioned earlier, the 12-month average was 36% of them were untimely. So that's 54,000 households were not able to get food. An average of about 1,646 households per month who got it in 4 to 7 days, and about 2,900 households who waited more than 7 days to get their benefits. During the 19 months of the pandemic, we found that 39% were untimely. And then for just the month of September, we pulled the data for just the month of September, they're still up to their shenanigans. And we see the most recent month, 29% untimely. So 4,900 households are not getting access to emergency CalFresh benefits within 3 days. That's unacceptable. And so that's why we're doing this. So of course, as I mentioned earlier, for those who find themselves with no money, being able to get your next meal now is your number one objective. We've created programs on the list here. I'm not going to go through all these, but there's a kind of summary of some things that we've done. Some of our partners have also done. We're also using this as a teachable moment to educate and enlighten our community about available benefits. So that kind of know your rights training on food security, food rights, food and water in particular. So we're getting the word out. Many people didn't know this either. They were not aware that they could actually get benefits that quickly. Because there's a lot of urban legend things going on. People just pass along information that's no longer correct or accurate. And so DPSS.
Todd, you are up past 15 minutes now, so you might want to think about,
It's almost over. Yes, thank you so much. Just I've included some frequently asked questions here for you to look at your leisure. Isn't this expected during the pandemic? How does LA compare to other counties? LA County is at the height. There are other counties, Tulare, Sonoma, and Sacramento County, who also have untimely processing of applications. Why we think it's happening, and then how to help. I would say that I'll just leave you with these 4 things. If you could help us identify other CalFresh recipients who've had similar problems receiving benefits, that would be ideal. And I can stay in touch with Margaret and Nell on this. If you could help us identify those people, I can get you the information about what it is that we want. If you would amplify our efforts on social media and in person to tell people, attending rallies. And then we have coalition work that happens that kind of aligns with some of the things that your group, as I understand it, does. And that's really around, in January, the budget response to the governor's budget across the state will be, we always respond with meetings with legislators. And finally, Hunger Action Week in May. We go to Sacramento, or we do it virtually, to meet with legislators about food justice issues. So with that, I thank you very much for your time, and I'm sorry I went over.
Thank you so much, Todd. Let's see. Okay. And so next up, we have Nancy Berlin.
Hi, everyone. It's Nancy Berlin again, and I'm going to be talking a little bit about what we usually think of when we think of welfare. So welfare doesn't really mean well-being to most people, even though that's what the word means. We usually think of it as the cash aid program that goes to families with children. And it was originated mostly as local programs in the early 1900s, where it went to widows so they wouldn't have their children taken away and institutionalized. And it was mostly for just widows. It became a federal program in 1935. That's when we got the Aid to Families with Dependent Children program. And that program was a little bit more expanded, but pretty much just went to white mothers. And Margaret's going to talk after me about some of the organizing that expanded out the aid to families with dependent children program. But as often has happened in our country, that kind of expansion where more people get benefits and more people of color are in programs led to a backlash. And there were people who felt that they bought into all the stereotypes and myths about women and people of color and who uses these programs. And so the program was pushed to become more and more coercive, which led to what we have today, the 1996 Welfare Reform Act, which was ushered in by then President Bill Clinton. Some of you might remember he talked about ending welfare as we know it. But what he and Congress really meant by that was to create programs that were more restrictive and met the needs of fewer people. And they actually changed the name of the program from Aid to Families with Dependent Children to TANF, Temporary Assistance to Needy Families, which tells you a lot. It's temporary assistance, and they also changed it to, so that means it has time limits and work restrictions and a lot of other restrictions as well. They also made the program a block grant. So before that, families got the money, they applied, and the federal government gave money to each and every family who qualified. It wasn't enough, but it worked that way. In 1996, it changed to a block grant program, and that means that every state gets a lump sum of money, and they have a lot of flexibility as to how to use that money, and I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. But it means that rather than just giving cash to families so that they can decide how to best meet their needs, there are a lot of controls in place about what families get. And the other thing that I think very few people know is that the original amount that Congress allocated for TANF in 1996 is exactly the same amount that we have in 2021. There has been no adjustment for inflation or population change in all of those years. So that now the basic TANF block grant has lost almost 40% of its value due to inflation. So what does this look like in our state of California? You heard from Todd that California likes to change the names of programs, and we did that with TANF as well. In California, it's called Calworks. Again, telling you a lot about what the program really is. That stands for California Work Opportunities and Responsibility to Kids. So it's about work and responsibility, not necessarily about lifting us out of poverty. And what does this look like for us? So we get the block grant in California, and you might think that even with that inflation reduced amount, we would spend that on cash aid. But actually, California only spends 34% of our block grant on cash assistance, 34%. The rest of it goes to a whole long line of other things. It goes to work programs, it goes to child welfare, the child welfare programs, which sometimes just snatches our kids from us. It goes to sports programs. It goes to a whole bunch of other things. It goes to probation workers. So in addition, we put in more strict work requirements than the federal government. The temporary federal program says that you have 60 months or 5 years on welfare. In California, you have 48 months. And even that is restricted because if you don't meet your work requirements after 24 months, you can lose your aid. We also have grant levels that are incredibly low. They may be higher than in other parts of the state, but of the country, but they're still incredibly low, including, for instance, grant levels in Los Angeles County for a mom and 2 children that are $925 a month. But California has decided that some parts of our state are high cost and some part are low cost. So if you live in Fresno, you get a little less, you get $878 a month. I think most of us would agree that all of California is a high cost state, county. And the average benefit is less than that. That's the maximum amount. Most of families only get $580 a month. I've been talking a lot about cash assistance for families, but what happens if you don't have children? Well, when I was in my 20s, I lost my job. I didn't have any children. Then I lost my apartment. I was sleeping on the floor in the living room with some other people who let me stay for a while. And at some point, they said I had to figure out something else. So I went to the welfare office and I applied for general assistance, which in Los Angeles is called general relief. General relief or assistance is meant to provide a safety net of last resort for people who are very poor and don't qualify for anything else. And there is no federal program like that. So states get to decide whatever they want to do or not do. And in fact, only 25 states in the whole United States have any kind of general assistance program at all. So there I was in the welfare office and I waited all day. I saw a worker who sent me with a whole bunch of papers and told me to come back in a week. I went back in a week, brought in all my documentation, even though, I mean, I hadn't eaten anything that day at all. And then the worker said, I can't help you today. We're too busy. Come back another time. And that was, I would say, a pivotal moment in my life. And I just told her I wasn't leaving. And I refused to leave the office. And the next thing that happened is they called the police, and the police came. And I was this far from being arrested just for being poor. But I did finally convince them, Todd will be happy to know, that I did convince them to give me my food stamps. It wasn't enough, but I left with my food stamps, and it got me to thinking about how unjust and cruel this so-called welfare system is. And I made a promise to myself to do something about that, which led to where I am today with all of you. So just a couple more words about general assistance. The amount that we have varies from county to county. It's a completely county funded program. So your board of supervisors in your county decides what the rules are and how much you get. In Los Angeles, you get $220 to $1 a month, which I think we would all agree you cannot live on $221 a month in Los Angeles. You cannot even rent a room for that. And in some places, the counties give no cash aid. In Ventura, they give vouchers. And in other places, they do a mix or they pay money to your landlord. So it's a terrible program, very cruel, doesn't really help people get back on their feet. This is a really quick overview. We have a long way to go. We definitely need a moral revolution in this country to get to a better place. We're going to talk about our demands in the Jubilee platform, but I want to turn it over to Margaret now to talk about the history and some of the incredible organizing that's gone on around these welfare rights and welfare programs.
Thank you so much, Nancy. That was just great. Are people hearing me okay? Thumbs up if you are. Right. And Nancy, just quickly, your experience at the welfare office reminded me as an immigrant coming from Barbados with my mother and 3 children and landing in New York City and realizing that all of us were homeless because our housing with my grandfather had fallen through. And so the family had to be split up and sent to stay with various relatives. We couldn't apply for welfare or any kind of cash assistance because at that time, to get into the country, you had to sign documentation saying that you would not, and we definitely would have been deported. So that's, that's how it is. This is after making a pact with myself as a child hungry in my village, saying that no child should ever be hungry. When I grow up, I intend to do something about it. So how did we get here? This history, thank you, Nancy, for covering some of it, starting out as a widows program. The program, when it was mainly white women, in particular white rural women, collecting welfare, this widow's pension was not controversial at all. Black and brown women, for the most part, either didn't know about it or didn't have access to benefits given institutional racism, Jim Crow, a whole set of things. So Black and brown women started organizing and giving out information about how to access what was then called AFDC, or your benefits. And the National Welfare Rights Organization was formed. A really vibrant movement grew into 10,000 women or more pushing and pressing for the right to cash for raising their children. And one of those women, one of those leaders of the National Welfare Rights Organization, was a woman out of Southern California, out of Watts, part of what's called South LA. And way back in the early 60s, here's what Johnny Tillman had to say about the right to welfare. She said, quote, "If I were president, I'd start paying women a living wage for doing the work we are already doing, child raising and housekeeping, and the welfare crisis would be over. Just like that, housewives would be getting wages too." Talk about a fusion statement. Here was a woman talking about money going to the most impoverished women, but also making the case for middle class and other what was then used to be called housewives or full-time homemakers. So the moment welfare then became racialized in a way and, attacked. Welfare mothers were seriously under attack. There was a famous report by a man who became a senator, Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan, the Moynihan Report, who basically said that Black women getting welfare was destroying the Black family. He was blaming Black women, Black single mothers in particular, for destroying the Black family. I'll say a little bit about the role that Moynihan played, because he was one of the key state planners, government planners, when it comes to trying to undermine welfare. One other quick story that I want to share about the National Welfare Rights Organization, because this is part of the history. Martin Luther King went to meet with those women, and there were some fierce women, okay? Beulah Saunders, Johnny Tillman, and others, to talk about legislation that he was trying to fight for. And he came and he started to talk to them, and the women clearly understood that he really didn't understand what they were about, or even the level of poverty that they and their families were experiencing. So they interrupted King and said, "Dr. King, if you don't know, say you don't know." And then this meeting could proceed, because the women, in a good way, because the women were getting very agitated. And to King's credit, he said, okay. He stopped and he listened to those women. And I would like to think, and I'm pretty sure that that is part of why Martin Luther King then went on to launch the Poor People's Campaign, because they gave him a real education about what it was like to be a single mother trying to raise your children in poverty, and on top of that, dealing with racism and all of the other things that we talk about in the Poor People's Campaign. And indeed, after King was assassinated, the first Poor People's Campaign, went on, and the National Welfare Rights Union members were crucial to organizing that Poor People's Campaign. You had women like the Reverend Annie Smart, Reverend Annie, as I call her. Annie Smart was also part of that campaign out of Baltimore, who traveled to a white rural area in Kentucky, mobilizing impoverished people to participate in the first Poor People's Campaign. Welfare mothers were critical in the success of that campaign, and a lot of people forget that. When we're talking about the history of the welfare rights movement. But welfare mothers were maligned as a bunch of lazy women doing nothing, just getting handouts, sitting around eating candy all day. Their children were disruptive, et cetera, et cetera. And they were maligned not only from the right, but even from some of our friends in the progressive movement. And the welfare rights movement, National Welfare Rights Organization, was coming up at the same time that mainstream, what we call mainstream feminism, was coming up. And their idea for liberation was for women to get a job outside the home. And they never really acknowledged the demands and what the welfare rights movement, that was a women of color led women's movement. The feminist movement never acknowledged it as such. And when welfare mothers were under attack and they tried to bring in workfare to say, you're not working, taking care of your children isn't work. What you need to do is go get any job outside the home in order to be, quote unquote, a productive member of society. There were very few who stood up to stand with welfare mothers, including some of our friends in organized labor. And very much at the center of this discussion is whether raising children, taking care of your family is work that is productive. At the same time that this fight was happening, the Wages for Housework campaign, of which I was part of founding Black Women for Wages for Housework, came in as another wing, so to speak, of the national welfare rights movement. And we all came together in 1977 at the first congressionally mandated conference on women, where we worked together. I was all the states all elected delegates, and we were supposed to come up with a platform of action to go to the president and Congress for implementation. And we came together with the National Welfare Rights Organization, and we threw out the workfare plank in that plan of action, it was called, and we rewrote the entire thing, and we opposed workfare, which is where you have to go get a job, any old job outside the home in order to get a welfare check. And we also put in language that said women on welfare, that welfare should be called a wage, underscoring the dignity of that work. There's no time to go into how we won it, because we did win it. And it was a fusion coming together across some very surprising lines, including some of the white women in the South that stood with us on that. Just fast forwarding a bit, I just have a few more minutes. We could actually spend a whole session, a whole workshop on these issues, actually, is that following Houston, there was a constant, Jimmy Carter lost the election, that plank was never implemented, but it took another 20 years before they were able to federalize workfare in Clinton's welfare reform. And of the fight that went on against workfare and to protect this cash money for mothers happened on a lot of different levels. I was part of a group of us that went to a grassroots delegation that went to Washington, D.C., sitting in the Senate Finance Committee, where the same Daniel Patrick Moynihan, who had written that Moynihan report attacking Black mothers, he was now a state senator, and he chaired that committee. And that committee was discussing welfare reform. But guess what? The voices of welfare mothers, of those of us most impacted, were not considered. We're not allowed to give testimony. I did a civil disobedient action in the Senate Finance Committee, thinking perhaps I would be arrested, but what the hell? But instead, Senator Moynihan banged his gavel and said, okay, you'll be allowed to testify. So right then and there, I had to give testimony to the Senate Finance Committee. One other piece before we go, on this is that there were so many attacks coming down on us, on the most impoverished women, and women like my mother, trying to get a little food stamps and couldn't, all kinds of complications with immigration, et cetera. But in our campaign, the Wages for Housework, we remembered Malcolm X saying, take it to the UN, take your issues to the UN. And it just so happened that the UN was having a decade for women. So we went into the UN, no time to explain how we did all of that, but we organized in the United States, we organized internationally within the UN, and it took us 10 years of serious, concentrated work to finally, in 1995, to win a resolution out of the UN that says taking care of children is work. The very thing that Johnny Tillman had said back in 1962, this Black woman out of Watts, and that governments had to measure and value that work. We won that resolution. We then tried, we introduced the legislation in Washington, the Unremunerated Work Act, with the Congressional Black Caucus. That did not pass, but we're still at it today. And where things are now is that with COVID has definitely exposed the centrality of caregiving work. The National Welfare Rights Organization, which at some point basically fell apart, was undermined. But what was born in its place is the National Welfare Rights Union. I'm on the board of that union. The union, we're reorganizing, we're expanding. The union is part of the National Steering Committee of the Poor People's Campaign. And out of the gate from the Poor People's Campaign, the story that Reverend Barber likes to tell, that I met him and said, some of us have waited 40 years for this movement, was exactly right. So we pushed to make sure that welfare as a right was part of the Jubilee platform, and also the call for a care income. We have also been working on the child tax credits, including for mothers on welfare, because tax credits before, if your income was too low, you couldn't access it. A lot of, there's a big movement now on a basic income, and some people are talking about a basic income for all. So this issue of welfare is central, it's fusion, because it not only deals with poverty, but it really deals with caregiving, and it deals with what is the purpose of the economy, which we think should be the caring of people and the environment. And I'll end there, just a quick summary of the history to where we are now. Thank you.
Thank you, Margaret. This was a jam-packed set of presentations. We do want to tell you and show you what the demands are in the Jubilee platform, how we are addressing these particular issues that we've all heard about here. So I'm going to read them to you. We don't have a lot of time to discuss them, but I do want you to see what they are. So as we've talked about, the part here we're discussing is to promote the general welfare, the right to welfare, and an adequate standard of living. Specifically, establish a guaranteed entitlement of the poor to a direct cash assistance program that supports poor and low-income households. And what you see, the image on the screen is protesters with signs standing off a phalanx of police. Next slide is, you'll see the image is a square box with the word repeal in red at the top and the TANF logo in a red circle with a line through it below. And the demand here is to redefine welfare as a right that strengthens our society and provides for the general welfare. We're calling for repealing temporary assistance for needy families, or TANF, because as we described, it's a terrible program and we deserve something much better than that. On the next slide, fully fund and expand SNAP and other assistance programs like the child tax credit and the earned income tax credit that provide assistance directly to the poor. We heard a lot about that from Todd about the problems in SNAP or CalFresh, and there are a variety of other programs that we haven't mentioned as much. Margaret did mention child tax credits, but all of these together are the kinds of welfare programs that we need. This image here is our 4 people standing behind a table with groceries and a sign that reads "Families for a Fair Budget." This slide says expand and fully fund the child care and development block grants to meet the child care and early childhood development and care needs of poor and low income families. We didn't get too much into this, but that's another part of the platform. The image here is, it's a flyer or a placard that reads "Families First" in orange letters on the left and demands on the right. And there are people holding signs as well. And then this slide says eligibility for all social welfare programs must be based on a universal standard that is not burdensome to prove. All of the presenters spoke to this particular one. There's a lot more you could say about it. The image here is from an organization in the 1990s, the Fair Share Network in California, who got this ad in the California edition of the New York Times. It says California kids will be begging on the streets by the year 2000, speaking to the passage of welfare reform in that year. This slide says funding for all welfare and public assistance programs must be indexed for inflation on an annual basis. Clearly, you heard that from presenters about how terrible it is that we can't even manage to do that with our programs. And the image is a drawing of a balance scale with a few groceries outweighed by this tall pile of money. Yep, that's what, good description. And here it says establish participatory oversight to engage recipients of welfare benefits in welfare programs at all levels of government. And the image here is a photograph from May 12th, 1968. It was in a newspaper, and it says Coretta Scott King leads a Mother's Day march through Columbus Heights to begin the Poor People's Campaign. This was organized by the National Welfare Rights Organization, and the demonstration highlights the experiences of women dealing with the problems of poverty and their rights to dignity and respect. Margaret talked about these campaigns. The banner that they're holding here says Mother Power, and it's one of the big parts of the Poor People's Campaign in the Jubilee platform, that we center the lives of those most impacted. So those are our demands in the Policy Jubilee platform. We want to thank you all for listening to this. We're not over yet, but we're going to break into small groups, but we wanted to remind you that we do have meetings every month. So here's what happens next. In the small groups that we're going to divide us all into, you'll identify a facilitator for your group to make sure that there's space for everyone to share their thoughts and to keep track of time. It's great if everybody gets to speak at least once before a second person speaks. You should introduce yourselves with your names, your pronouns, your locations, and share your thoughts about the question: if these demands were met, what impact would it have on me, my community, and our state? And I think with that, we're going to go into our groups.
Great. Thank you, Nancy. And so I have created 6 breakout groups. And so they'll be really small because we're really short on time. And so you'll really only have about 10 minutes in those breakout groups. And so there'll be like 3 people or 4 people max in the breakout groups. And there is a breakout where the ASL interpreters will be there. And so thank you for putting your name in the chat if you need ASL interpretation. I'm going to open the rooms. If you get an invitation, please accept it. And we'll see you in about 10 minutes. I'll give a warning at 5 minutes. And so we can be sure that, you pass the mic so that everybody gets a chance to speak. Margaret, you have your hand up?
Yeah, I'm just wondering if at all possible, if we could have about 15 minutes or so in breakout, because people really love to be able to talk with each other. I know that gives us a little less time for the closing, but it may very well be worth it if, you know.
Yeah, well, it just means we won't have time to talk in big group again. So, you know,
Yeah.
we'll sacrifice that this time. Okay.
Okay,
Thanks
thank
so
you.
much. Okay, see you soon.
Thank you, everyone. It sounds like we had some really good discussions going, even though the time was short. And we sometimes that happens, especially in smaller groups. So I'm glad we were able to have that. We are almost out of time, but I do want to say a few more things before we close out. First, again, a thanks to our ASL interpreters, Derek Canyon and Heather West. Our tech support team, Reverend Rowan, Peg Miller, Wendy Roskin, and Nell Myhan. And also, of course, always thank to our convener, Margaret Prescott, for making this happen every week and every month that we meet. And all of you for taking the time today to really learn more about this and to talk with us and help us educate one another. This is a real basic premise of the Poor People's Campaign. Everybody in, nobody out, and that we lift from the bottom. So this is what we do. If you have any feedback, we want to hear it. So there's a form in the chat that you can use to let us know. We'd love to hear from you. And we hope you will join us on our next Jubilee Policy Platform Study Group on Thursday, January 13th at noon. We'll be looking at part 2 of this section, point 4, protect and expand Social Security, supplemental security income, and Social Security disability insurance. That was a big topic in my discussion group.
Yeah.
So I hope those folks will come back. And we'll talk more at our regular meeting of the Policy and Political Education Working Group about the next reading and the presenters and how to organize that. So you can also let us know in the feedback form or in the chat here if you want to attend or want more information about that. And I think that's it.
Yeah, Policy and Ed is meeting next Thursday at noon.
Okay.
So please put your name and contact information in the chat if you'd like to be part of the discussion and help us to plan more activities. Thank you. And lift up Nell, who really holds all the pieces together. And thank you, Nancy, as well.
Yay, Nell.
Thank you.
Thank you all for joining. And there's a comment in the chat. Be sure to have ASL interpreters for January 13th. So we're putting in our request right now, Heather.
Okay.
Okay, gotcha. Okay,
Thank
thanks
you.
so much.
Bye, everybody.
And I
Thank you.
Until the next time, be safe and well.
Not one step back.
Forward together.
Forward together.
Not one step
One
back.
step back.
Yeah. Forward together.
Not
One step back.
When we lift from the bottom,
Everybody rises.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Take good care.
Bye-bye.
All righty.
Bye.
Be safe and well.